All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Hans Magleby. I am the president of an organization called WhyTry. I don't know if all of you have heard of us before or know WhyTry. Um, WhyTry is a program that's used in a lot of different ways. We'll share a little bit about that today. My background is I have a degree in art. I was an art teacher. I've also had a lot of experience in technology and in instructional design. I was the art director for a video game company, and I've been kind of a tech entrepreneur. And then I started WhyTry years ago, kind of as a hobby and something that was an interest of mine. And I started with this other gentleman on here with me today, Christian Moore. Christian and I are longtime friends. Our relationship goes back to when we were in high school. We met during our teenage years. Christian had moved in next door to me, was living with his grandparents, and as we became friends, I got to know a little bit more about his background. And I'm gonna let him share today some of his background because it relates to what we're going to be talking about today. And much of what we do organizationally as a company, as an organization, and in our programs and tools, a lot of it stems from Christian's background and my background, and kind of a combination of what we do and then others that we've brought into our team over the years that have made amazing contributions to who we are today and what we do. Christian, let me introduce Christian just real briefly here. Christian is a licensed clinical social worker. He is a sought after national speaker. He's given many keynote addresses at a lot of education conferences in particular. Um, he is a huge advocate for youth. And I think you'll hear that just in his story and things that he's going to share with you today. He is also the author of the book, The Resilience Breakthrough, and it's our bestseller. And he's really, that is his area of expertise, is resilience. And so I'm going to turn it over to Christian and let him kind of take it from here. And then we're going to share some more things about who we are organizationally and some of the things that we want to talk about today related to this challenge that we're seeing across the country for a disengagement, a lack of connection among students, and some of the outcomes from that are leading into chronic absenteeism and problems with student engagement and attendance. So, Christian, you want to take it?
Yeah. I'm excited to be here. Just looking at all the names, all the different places people are from across the country. We have a really good group today, Hans, really diverse group, some amazing people on here. It's interesting. Yesterday, I was on the phone with probably, I don't know, 6, 7 different people, and almost every one of them talked about chronic absenteeism, just what they're dealing with there and student engagement. And, it's interesting. We've been doing this work for a long time and, almost 30 years. And what we're starting to realize is, we have all these things, all these tools, but I think sometimes the littler things are being overlooked on what creates absenteeism and some of the causes behind it. And I think this will be well worth everyone's time here. Um, I got interested in the subject matter of resilience because of some of the challenges I had growing up. This is after that. Go put that picture back up
Go
there.
back.
Yeah, put that picture back up there.
This is just proof that we've known each other for a long time. This
Yeah,
is
it's
our
interesting. Right, but not too long before this picture, I grew up. Hans is from the Rocky Mountains. I grew up back east outside of Baltimore, and Hans, I came out, got shipped out to live with my grandparents because I spray painted my name on a water tower. I grew up outside of Baltimore during the 70s and 80s, and I knew one day I was going to share my work with the world, and so my artwork. So I decided to put it on a big old water tower. And they shipped me to the Rocky Mountains, and that's where me and Hans became friends. I don't know, man, Hans, it's like 45 years ago, maybe almost, but we're gonna hit 50 years here pretty soon as knowing each other.
You're
Um,
getting old.
yeah, man. So that's me, my Washington Commanders jacket there, that Sears catalog jacket. We're going to make it to the Super Bowl this year. Both my parents had some mental health issues. My mom had social phobia, had a fear of leaving the house. My dad was autistic, and you'll hear more about that. It was a very interesting human being. Um, I was a special education student with severe learning differences. When I was 17 years old, I was illiterate. And it's interesting, that last one there, no hope for leaving the neighborhood. I was talking to my son Carson the other day. He's 18 years old, and he just thought that's the craziest thing. He read that. He's like, you couldn't get out of your neighborhood? And I said, well, you could get out of it, but none of my friends had cars. That's why I was so excited when Hans had that Suzuki Jeep, man. We could go anywhere. And we would have that Suzuki Jeep. We'd have balloons in there, water balloons. I'd be throwing balloons out of it. Anyways, Hans was a
You're not
bad
supposed to tell
example
people
to
that.
me. All right, Hans was a bad example to me. But anyways, no, he was actually one of my first friends that knew how to keep me out of trouble. All right, so the next slide here.
Sorry, let me move on there.
There we go. It's popping up. So, anyways, because of those challenges, I became interested in resilience, and I wanted to know where resilience comes from internally. Me and Hans spent the last almost 30 years teaching skills of resilience. And the breakthrough is knowing, where does resilience come from inside, internal resilience. And that's what's unique about this book. It's the only book that will show you where resilience comes from. All right, we'll hit the next one here. All right. So, my interest in resilience, again, comes out of my life journey, my life experience. It's interesting growing up there in Baltimore. I saw a lot of resilient people. I saw people overcome major obstacles. I did my graduate thesis looking at the impact that learning disabilities has on poverty and crime. And I remember my professor saying to me, Christian, you can talk about this all you want, but you got to look at a solution to this. What's the solution? And when I came across the Kauai Resilience Project, I don't know if you see that next one there. Yeah, I came across this longitudinal study out of Kauai. It's like a 20-year study. And when I found that resilience was the X factor, I started really focusing in and keying on resilience. It challenged the myth that a child who is a member of a so-called high-risk group is destined to struggle or fall short in life. And again, I saw many kids transcend their background, their environment, their home life. Often when I work with kids, I can't change what's going on at home. I can't change what's going on in the neighborhood. I can't change what's happening in school. But I think our responsibility as adults is to make sure the child has the tools to thrive if the circumstances around them don't change. Because my circumstances were not going to change a whole lot. And so I think it's so important that we make sure they have the skills of resilience, and then they also know where resilience comes from internally. And that's what we'll focus on, some of that here today. So here's my life story. For years I verbally told my life story, and one day some close friends and a counselor said to me, Christian, you tell your trauma over and over and over again. You might want to put that in a video clip. An interesting side note, right there where you're looking at me, my blood sugar level is over 730. So keep that in mind when you're watching this video. 2 days later, after this was shot, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. But in the last 3 years, I have not even been on insulin. So, I'm trying to eat correctly. I got my sugar-free soda water right here. And so trying to stay away from that sugar. But I got the sugars. And so my friends in the South, I got to pay respect to you. I always love it when I go to the South and they go, you got the sugars, Mr. Moore. And so anyways, yeah, just keep that in mind when you're watching this video. There's a couple funny situations there, if you understand I have diabetes during this video clip. But I'm in good shape now. All
I
is
grew up
good.
in between Baltimore and DC, and a family of 12 kids, 5 brothers, 6 sisters. Both my parents had some mental health challenges. My mom had social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, had a fear of leaving the house. You have to leave the house to go get food. So there wasn't a lot of food to eat sometimes in my house growing up. Don't tell anyone, but my dad was one of the highest level code breakers at the National Security Agency. You could give my dad any mathematical problem and he could instantly rattle it off the top of his head. My dad was autistic. He was a genius, but he had very little common sense or social skills. If you've ever seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind, you've met my dad. So having 2 parents with some mental health challenges put me in a situation where I ended up being a street kid. I could hang out till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning on a school night, had very few rules, very few boundaries. One night, I was out late at night and a car pulls up and I hear a voice. And the voice I hear is the voice of a woman who I endearingly call Mama Jackson. It was one of my best friend's moms who sees me out there, late at night.
Christian had so many obstacles that was going on in his home.
She knows what I'm out there doing, and she says, look, don't you ever set foot on our property. I'm gonna call the school tomorrow. I'm gonna make sure you're not in any of Sean's classes. I remember thinking to myself, dang, I know I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. I can never go to school with him ever again.
When you see a child that's hungry, there's no happiness there. You're thinking about what other kids have that they don't have, okay? But when you see a child that's hungry and you give that child some food, you see that child's disposition change.
Going to school was very difficult for me. As a child, I was diagnosed with ADHD, conduct disorder, and severe learning disabilities. When I was sitting in a classroom, oftentimes, I was embarrassed. When I got called out loud, I would act up and get in trouble instead of embarrassing myself because I didn't know how to read or didn't know how to do basic math. So, for me, it was like going to the doctor's office every day, going to school. I had a hard time telling time. When I was even 17 years old, I couldn't tell time on a hand clock. To me, 4:45 equals 25 minutes to 5, but they tell me a quarter's 15. But how could a quarter not equal 25?
When we concentrate on that more, to make sure that a child's needs are provided for, then that child will thrive. I know that I'm loved, and I know that this person is going to feed me to make sure I have what I need. One of his teachers in high school said to him that he would never go to college. Christian went to college.
Growing up in between DC and Baltimore, I saw many social problems in my community, in my neighborhood. I saw poverty, I saw hopelessness at times. I even saw some violence. But I remember walking to school one morning and literally seeing one of my best friends evicted from his house. His furniture was all throughout his front yard. I could see the heartbreak in his eyes, his parents' eyes. And I knew in that moment, I wanted to be a social worker. And I knew I could not become a social worker unless I went to college. But I was told college was probably not going to be an option for me with a 6th grade math level, a 7th grade reading and writing level. Statistically, I had a better chance of playing the NBA and becoming LeBron James.
His experience was at the other side of the track. Life was different. Life was unique. And the kids like that, they have to survive.
I struggled getting through college math. College math is a requirement to make it through school. I remember that feeling in my stomach when I knew I couldn't graduate.
They're not going to let me graduate because I can't do math. I can't count money, I can't numbers, I get confused and all of these things. He was like a bobcat in a cage.
So I came up with something called the No F game plan. And this was a strategy that I used to make it through school with my learning differences.
He made himself big. He made himself known to others. I'm here. Hey, I may not have what you have, but I have a street smart.
I would go to every class. I would sit on the front row. I would do all the homework assignments. And I would do enough extra credit to get a D-. I would shoot for A's, but I learned in college you get just as much credit with a D-.
And his paper is not polished. Other students get an A. Christian gets B, sometimes a C. But he has ideas. He has a substance. And the WhyTry program that he ran with and helped incredible number of students and the teachers and administrators came out of a classwork.
He created an environment to teach teachers how to really deal with students that may have significant functional limitations.
I persevered. Luckily, I knew what resilience was. I knew how to take my academic challenges and use them as a reason to knock down barriers, to focus on what was right with me, not what was wrong with me.
The vision of WhyTry, and I think this thing is called the roller coaster ride. And I'm so glad that when he fell off of that roller coaster, that he got back on.
Dr. Virgil Wood, civil rights icon and close friend to Dr. Martin Luther King, learned about WhyTry's impact and decided to honor Mama Jackson with the National Rosa Parks Save the Children Award. Mama Jackson gave me a safe and loving environment so I could thrive. She didn't get rid of my problems at home, at school, in my neighborhood. She showed me how to use those problems as a fuel source to put one foot in front of another and create a productive outcome with the opposition. Despite my many challenges, I was able to get a master's degree with a 6th grade math level and a 7th grade reading and writing level, and become a licensed clinical social worker. As a school social worker, I quickly noticed it was very difficult to engage students like myself, especially students coming to school with no paper, no pencil, no notebook, totally disengaged from the academic process. I noticed doing verbal cognitive intervention didn't reach many of these students. One day my colleague pointed out to me that most of the students I'm working with are visual learners, not auditory learners. So I thought to myself, wait a minute, I'm an artist. Why would I not take everything and make it visual for the student? Most of these kids are visual learners. So I decided to take evidence-based mental health practice and deliver it in visual metaphors. And I noticed once I did it in a visual metaphor, the student locked in on the visual picture. It kept them engaged. They were far more interested in what I was doing. I knew I had the student in that moment. Using visual metaphors to teach things like your decisions have consequences, how to tear off your labels, how to understand your emotions and the emotions of others. And what was really exciting to me is sometimes 2 or 3 weeks later, they could remember the details of what we did a few weeks before in counseling. And that's when I knew we had that engagement. Then we decided to reinforce the picture with music and physical activities to increase that engagement even more. We took brief solution-focused therapy, reality therapy, strength-based counseling, and combined it into a learning method that any educator or counselor could use to reach students, especially students that are having a hard time answering the question, why try?
All right, cut off there, just the end.
You're fine. Like you should kind of big picture of my life story. You can see I was extremely blessed to have Mama Jackson come into my life. These different mentors. This gentleman right here was a massive, massive mentor. This is Dr. Seipel. He went to Cornell University. He just wanted me to know, Christian, how did you make it this far in school with your background, with your learning differences? So I wrote down some principles on a piece of paper, and that was the start of WhyTry. Now WhyTry has been used in over 30,000 schools, what we're about to show you, with over 3 million students. And it really came out of the most simple thing in the world is I would just ask these kids, some questions, why try, ask them what they're dealing with. They kind of blow me off. And so I started making everything visual. A school psychologist showed me that most of the kids I'm working with are visual learners. So I started hand drawing everything in counseling for the student. At the end of the hour, I'd say, what does this picture teach? I never had a kid go, I don't get this picture. I think being someone with learning disabilities, I don't like anything complicated. I like things to stay simple as possible. And so that kind of became the start of WhyTry there. And so I'll show you some of these metaphors now. These metaphors consist of, again, visual pictures that just teach the skills of resilience. And then again, in my book, we talk about where it comes from internally. Here are some of the skills of resilience. This helps students understand their decisions have consequences. This is the reality ride that Mama Jackson was referring to. This is usually the first picture, 90% of the time that we start with. I'll just have them put down, throw the picture in front of them. They can fill it out as they go, or I can fill it out for them either way. But I'll just say, what's the definition of reality? They'll say reality is what's real, what's happening. Reality is I have all Fs. I got kicked out of class. They usually say, I got to talk to a dumb social worker like you. I always like that one. I'll say this roller coaster, it starts up, it goes uphill. I'll say, what are your uphill challenges at home, at school, with peers? A lot of times, because these uphill challenges, we do some things that are getting you into trouble. What's getting you into trouble? It could be, skipping school, talking during class, fighting, running away, doing drugs. I'll say when you do those things, you go up, you have a rush, and they'll say, what did you tell me the definition of reality is? I'll say reality is what's real. I'll say, what's the reality of skipping school? I have to go to in-school suspension, the crash there. I had to repeat the 8th grade. So you can see what we're doing. You can see those are their uphill challenges. That's what's getting them in trouble. Those are the consequences. The loop represents the problems they keep doing over and over. And I'll say, you're in that loop if you feel frustrated, confused, angry, scared. I'll say, my job as a school social worker is to show you how to get out of that loop and how to get on that other track to opportunity, freedom, self-respect. So I believe that's the answer to the question, why try? If you try in life, you'll have more opportunity, freedom, self-respect. But if you notice that you still have lows on that other track, I don't know about you all, the more good I try to do in the world, sometimes you still have those lows, right? It's just the human condition. So we talk about the reality of life. At the end of the hour, I would say, what does this picture teach? I've never had a child K through 12th grade. We also work in some prisons, so it's actually K through death row. Me and Hans like to say it's the only program K through death row in America. But the reason why we can teach, I know that sounds funny, but the reason why we can teach it K through 12th grade or so is because everything we do is visual, reinforced with music, physical activities. And we have a whole curriculum now for pre-K as well. And so each one of these pictures is reinforced with music and physical activities and a lot of art projects. I'll say, draw me a picture of what your life looks like when you're crashing. Draw me a picture if you get on that other track to opportunity, freedom, self-respect. Create a collage about what life is like in that loop. So we have lots of art activities, music activities, and physical activities, body kinesthetic activities that reinforce the metaphors here.
Christian, one of the things I love about this that, you look at this picture and it may just seem kind of simple or may seem kind of chaotic because you got all these questions written around it, but there's something really powerful about when you get to sit down with a kid or a group of kids and process what this picture represents and how it makes that connection to life. It's in the processing that this becomes really powerful. And then, like Christian was saying, we'll do different things. We'll do activities that kind of reinforce it. We have tons of story examples. They're either in the form of a book or a video clip or even our own personal stories that we use when we're teaching this, that help put it into a context, that help kids kind of see how their life relates to this metaphor that we're talking about here. And it gives them insight in a powerful way that you don't normally see. When Christian first started doing these with kids, we would sit down afterwards and kind of process how this is going. We would talk about, what's happening here. And he was just so excited. It's what got me excited into this. My background is as an art teacher, like I mentioned, and it got me excited about this because I thought, wow, I learned visually and being able to come up with these metaphors to help take these principles that Christian had identified that helped him make it through school and apply that in a way that a kid can understand. It's the one thing that makes WhyTry probably different than any other approach out there doing what we do.
All right, the next one just shows the student how to get on that track to opportunity, freedom, self-respect. Everything in the program focuses on that. The next step to do that is we want to help them tear off their labels. When I first work with many students, they'll have 3 or more of these labels, failure, druggie, learning disabled, dumb, lazy, rebellious, attitude problem, troublemaker. So I say, hey, look, I'm a partnership with you in helping you tear off these labels. I'll take the piece of paper after we circle whatever labels they have, and I'll say, if you have any other labels, man, the words they come up with for some of their other labels will take your breath away. It's often heartbreaking. And then I'll take that piece of paper, I'll turn it over, I'll draw the outline of a can, and then I'll just fill that can up with their strengths. What I like about myself, what other people like about me. And if you think about it, your identity is massive. It impacts your motivation, your desire to even turn in your homework, your desire to show up to school. Identity is massive. And, the labels that these kids walk around with have a huge impact on their motivation. And you can just see the weight of the world come off their shoulders when you partnership with them and tearing off their labels. Hey, Hans, why don't you share one of the physical activities here with this one? And
Sure. One of the things I love with this is the fact that, you know, your labels impact your opportunities a lot. If people see you in a negative light, it's harder to make friends. It's harder to, as an adult to get the job you want or to get a promotion or, to have opportunities that are important to you. And a lot of times kids feel like there's nothing they can do about it. If those are the labels that people see in them, they can't do anything. And we know by helping them focus on what Christian was talking about there, their strengths, the positive attributes, it, it can, they can focus on what's positive about them, helps people see that instead of seeing some of the things that they may perceive as negative. And so it's hard to get kids to think that way. A lot of times when they have low self-image and they've been struggling with their the way they see themselves in a positive light, we have to do different things to kind of draw it out of them. And so one of the things I love is we'll create just an object lesson with a big can. I usually get a can of tomato sauce and I'll show it to kids and I'll say, what is this can? What is this? What's in this? And we'll talk about it. I'll have one kid kind of describe what they're seeing on the label. It's tomato sauce. It has a brand, it has a picture, it has nutritional facts and different things on there. And then at the end, I kind of just, as we're processing that, I'll say, so what does the label do? And they'll say, well, it tells you what it is. I'll say, do you notice how when you meet somebody for the first time, we do the same thing. We try and create a label and a first impression for those people. And, do you ever meet somebody, form a first impression, and then you get to know them over time and you realize that first impression you had was way off. They're very different than what you thought initially. And I think we all can relate to that. And so we'll talk about labels and like Christian said, I'll usually get a piece of paper and since I'm an art teacher, I'll show them how to draw a picture of a can. We'll put a can on there, give them some colored pencils and we'll have them spend some time creating a label that represents the negative things that they've been called in their life that they don't like. And I'll have them color it and design it. And then after about 10 minutes or so, I'll say, time out, everybody, bring your paper over here, get a big trash can in the middle of the room. So I want you to just tear that up and throw it away. And I'll give them a new fresh piece of paper and I'll say, I want you to create a new can this time and create a label that represents all those things up there to the side under step 3 here. What do you like about yourself? What others like about you? Your accomplishments, your strengths, your goals and dreams. And if you had to label yourself, what would it be? And it must be positive. And we'll spend all this time having them think about that. And sometimes it's hard to get them to think that way. So I'll try and have some of the other kids in a group put positive things on their can, and I'll go around and write positive things on their can. And it's a really powerful thing when kids that have low self-esteem get to see how others see strengths in them. I've seen kids get emotional in this activity, and it's a powerful experience for them. And then as an object lesson with that can, I'll have a kid help me open it, and we'll carefully open it. I'll hold it while they're working the can opener, and then when they're just done there, I'll kind of carefully take the lid and try and see if I can open it up, and I'll intentionally spill it on a kid. And instead of being tomato sauce, inside I've got it full of some Starburst or some candy of some kind. And I like Starburst because they kind of are a symbol. A star is a symbol, and inside of each student is a star. And it's something that we view as positive. And if you're the best, if you're the greatest, you're an all-star or a superstar, right? And so we talk about inside of every one of them is an all-star. And I love it because, well, first off, we have a sneaky way of doing it. We have opened the can and we have instructions on how to do this in the activity. I've cut the bottom of the can off with a special can opener, cleaned it out, packed it full of some candy, used a little bit of super glue and glued it back on. And then we open the top of the can, and you can't tell when you see the can that it's been opened. It looks like it's just a normal can. And so then when I spill it on them, it creates a big surprise. And, whenever you can add emotion to a lesson, it's going to make it more memorable. And so I love that. And I love the fact that it kind of sends a powerful message that what's inside is not necessarily what's on the outside. And that's what we're saying in this metaphor. The real me is what's on the inside. It's not that label on the outside. And so then we kind of take them through how they can tear off their label. But we have lots of different activities similar to that for every one of these units where we'll make it either hands-on or something they experience. Sometimes they're just a quick object lesson. Sometimes they're actual movement activities where your students are getting and kind of working together on this. So tearing off your labels is a really powerful one. And it's just all about positive self-image and self-esteem. And so like Christian was saying, everything that we have, you're just seeing, these are just some of the original metaphors. We have 10 units that teach these skills of resilience, and we have multiple metaphors for each of these units that we use to adapt it to different age levels down into elementary all the way up through 12th grade, like Christian was saying. We have activities, we have story examples, videos, art, music, all these different ways of trying to engage kids in a way that they can understand and remember, that caters to multiple learning styles all at once. So here, you want to take them through the rest of these? We'll go through them pretty quick here.
Yeah, I'm going to highlight these really, really quick. Also, while you have Hans on here, too, if anybody has any questions, I saw a couple questions pop up. Hans can answer any questions.
Yeah, you bet.
And Hans pretty much created all this curriculum here. So you got Hans right here to answer any questions. So feel free to do that. I'm going to highlight the rest of these in the next literally 3 minutes, so we can jump into some other stuff here. And just like with the other two metaphors, we went into more depth. All of these follow that same pattern with stories, activities, art activities, music. So this next one here is how to control your defense mechanisms. When I was in school, the teacher would say, Christian, turn to page 130 and read out loud. I didn't know how to read, so I'd swear at the teacher or punch the kid next to me for, acting out behaviorally. I'd much rather get in trouble for that than everybody's laughing at me because I don't know how to read. Today I realized, why was I doing that? I had no control over my defense mechanisms. So this just walks them through their positive and negative defense mechanisms. The next one here is a tribute here of water. We have to drink enough water to stay alive, but too much water, we know, can flood, can kill us. So I look at life's problems being like water. We can channel it through dams and create electricity, or we know, again, too much water, we have problems. We focus on we want them to focus their self-talk. That first dam there, we want them to focus their self-talk on what they have control over. One of the most empowering things is to only focus on what you control. I don't control how other people respond to even what I'm saying right now, but I control if I put 100% effort in to communicating the message. Thank you for the heart. All right, peace. You got to get the heck out of your brain, and you got to tap into here. When I'm speaking to like 2,000 people in the audience, I'll say, everybody point to yourself. 99% of that audience will point to themselves right here. We don't usually point here to ourselves. We point here because we feel here at this level. And that means that you go through the motions, you don't give up out of respect for people who believe in you, care about you. If I never got invited to speak again, I would go through the motions, I would grind hard for my two kids, Cooper and Carson. And then we want them to tap into a passion, purpose, or interest. So anyways, that one right there is what we call the motivation formula. Your passion, purpose, or interest will always lead to a support system. Me and Hans have connected for 30 years because we have the same passion at helping, youth.
It's kind of, I was going to say, sorry to interrupt you, Christian. It's kind of, this is where I think the book, The Resilience Breakthrough, kind of came out of this one and kind of the focus of this one, which is really just having a resilient mindset, recognizing that we couldn't get rid of kids' problems, but if we can help them see the problem and the energy that comes from the problem as a resource, something that you can take and channel, at its core, this is resilience. The motivation formula is focusing on how to channel your challenges in a positive direction and for productivity. And everything Christian's talking about here are different ways that we would help channel those challenges. And then that kind of led to this discussion that we cover in our book.
All right, the next metaphor here. This is a tribute to my home state of Maryland. You put a bunch of live crabs in a pot. If you don't put a lid on the pot, why can't the crabs get out of the pot? All my friends in Salisbury, Maryland are screaming at the top of their lungs right now because the other crabs are reaching up and pulling them down. And so I'll say, hey, your friends you're skipping school with, you're doing drugs with, fighting with, all they're doing is they're pulling you down. They're keeping you in that pot. And you can see some of the questions, so an interesting question written around the metaphor is, what are the reasons for staying in that pot? Sometimes, if I'm in a gang, that gang gives me protection, it gives me prestige, it acts as a surrogate family. There's payoffs to sometimes, but we all know there at the bottom it says warning. If you try to get out, you will be attacked. We know the reality of life is if you try to get out of that pod, you try to make a difference, you are going to be attacked. That's just the human condition. Again, the more advocacy I do for women, for children, for poor people, whoo, you're in the fight. You're going to be attacked hard if you do real advocacy work. Then I write down, I have this student on this one, write down whatever problem they're dealing with. And it's just a simple problem solving model. They have to identify the problem. You got to create options, get help, take action. But number 5 is key. 1, I can't change. 10, I know I have the strength to change. If the student says anything below a 5, I'll spend the next week or two helping them believe that change is possible. Because as humans, we don't put effort in unless we believe change is around that corner. That if I do A, B, or C, there'll be some benefit. That's just part of the human condition. And then number 6 is jump back up. So anyways, that's that one right there. The next one is
The
amazing.
one thing that, let me just say one thing on this one. The one thing that I think is so powerful about this one is that, we spend so much time trying to motivate our students and engage them and get them to put effort in. I mean, that's what WhyTry is all about. And sometimes we get to a point where, they're feeling a connection with us. We're helping them to want to be better. But if they don't know where to apply their effort and they keep experiencing setbacks and failure, it's really hard to stay motivated. And so what I love about this one that Christian's sharing with you all is this is just a simple problem solving model that can help them, that they can apply to any challenge that they have and see how to work through that and how to actually accomplish it or overcome those challenges. And you don't have to be some special talented person to do this. Anybody can do this and can be a good problem solver if they just understand the model. That's the beautiful thing about it.
The
Desire,
next
time, and
one,
effort. Sorry.
yep. The next one just really focuses on hard work. I'll say to get through this maze, you had to have the desire to do it. You had to put the time in. You had to put the effort in. Again, it's hard work. It takes about 20 minutes to get through this maze. When they're just about to finish the maze, they're in the T there. We'll snag it from them and they'll go crazy. They're like, come on, Mr. Moore, give me my maze back. I've been working on this for the last 20 minutes. Adults will even respond the same way. And I'll say, why do you want to complete this? And they'll say, I've been working at it. And I'll say, yeah, you had the desire to get through it. You put the time in, you put the effort in. You're going to experience that accomplishment zone when you apply hard work, desire, time, and effort. And I'll say that accomplishment zone is the same feeling you're going to feel when you graduate from high school. The next one here is they got to lift society's laws and rules. The weightlifter, he's buff on one side, he's kind of weak on the other side. On the weak side, you see the balloon, and that represents what they've given up on. There's no resistance from that balloon. But on the other side, they push up against that weight and it tears the cells, it tears the fibers in the muscles. For example, I do 3,000 sit-ups. Right when my eyes open up, I do 3,000 sit-ups. So I used to have a 6-pack. Now I have a keg basically as a stomach because I do all these sit-ups. I don't recommend you build your stomach muscles that much. And that's my built-in joke. That's a really painful joke when no one's laughing, Hans.
Yeah.
You can't hear
Crickets.
them.
All I hear are crickets right now.
No, there'll be a heart popping up. Somebody caught that joke.
I need a
Caught
sound
that joke.
effect. I'm going to add next
Somebody,
time we do one of
no,
these. I'm
somebody
going to do a
caught that
sound
joke.
effect
You'll
of
see a heart. You'll
crickets.
see a heart. All right, there we go.
No, hey,
Oh, there we
stop that,
go. There
people.
we go. That's what I'm talking about. And so,
Moving on. Get plugged in.
all right, we'll go to this. Often when we first work with kids, they have one or less of these. Our goal is they get plugged into at least 3 of these support systems. One of the good things that came from COVID is now we know the debate is over. Humans need other humans to thrive. For years I would get lit up. They go, that's just coming from a bleeding heart social worker. Relationships aren't the most important thing. The other things are more. I'm like, nah, I'm telling you guys for 30 years, I'm screaming it's the relationship. And then COVID hit. Again, COVID was horrible. But one good thing, the debate is over. We all need each other. And that's the most powerful thing in the world. They got to get plugged into a parent or caregiver, a positive friend, teacher, counselor, school official. Hans, you want to comment on this one? This is a pretty significant one, and why I must feel bad blowing over it really quick.
No, it's one of the most simple metaphors we have for sure in terms of just trying to understand. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
But what's powerful about this is I feel like a lot of the kids I work with, and you all I imagine can probably relate to this. I have kids that are very independent that I work with. They want to be independent, at least as they get into their teen years, especially. And if they can't do something on their own, they feel like asking for help is a sign of weakness. Is that something you all ever see? And I feel like that is maybe one of the greatest thinking errors they make. Getting help is not a weakness, it's a strength. And so we just we're just trying to help them understand the importance of support systems and the fact that they can create them. You know, a lot of kids don't have strong supports at home and in different areas. That's why we created that motivation for them, because we recognize I can't control the fact that they got a rough home environment, but I can help them build some resilience in the face of that environment that will help them be able to cope. And, you know, if you don't have a strong support system at home, that's the first category here. We're going to try and help them improve that. But then we want to connect to other things, positive friends, teachers, mentors, something that inspires, motivates you to do good. And realizing that if they don't have a good support system in those areas, they can create them. And that's the powerful thing, I think, with this one.
All right, Hans, go ahead and take the next one, Seen Over the
Sure.
Wall. I know you're tying that together, but this is kind of a self-portrait of myself here.
So this is kind of the summary of all the metaphors, and it's kind of a review. Sometimes I'll start teaching WhyTry to a group of kids with this one and kind of outline this is our objective. This is what we're focusing on. But what I want to do is instead of taking you through this in kind of its normal form, I want to relate this to what we're talking about today as it relates to student engagement or the disengagement of our students and chronic absenteeism. You know, this can also be a metaphor for that. And, you know, when you think of chronic absenteeism, it's often a sign that student feels disconnected, right? They're unmotivated. They're not unable to see the value of school or the relevance of school. When I talk to kids and show them this picture, I usually say, you know, imagine, you know, this kid here represents each one of you. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? When I have this conversation with students, a lot of times they don't think of themselves in 5 days. They're not thinking future. It's metaphorically like they're standing in front of a brick wall and all they can see are their challenges, their problems, peer pressure, hopelessness, anxiety, truancy, problems at home, failure, depression. And it's hard to answer the question, why try, when you're in this position? And so being in front of the wall with that limited view of your future, it's very common for kids to have no hope, to feel disengaged. And this is where we see chronic absenteeism, you know, come into play right now. You know, in most states, the numbers that we're seeing right now are at least 1 in 3 are chronically absent. In many other areas, we're seeing it closer to 50% of students are chronically absent. And so this is a real problem. It's a real challenge that we're seeing nationally and even more intense in local areas. So for us, the first thing that we have to do to help students move forward is our relationship. It's our connection with them. You know, it's the key to motivation is what we refer to relationships. How we form a connection where they know that we care about them, that we believe in them. We have this whole approach to doing that. We call it surrendering the one-up relationship. It's part of what we do when we train people in WhyTry, but we have a whole other resource that I want to share with you today that kind of focuses on this with all of our staff, even those that aren't necessarily using WhyTry, you know, in a school. Everyone can improve their relationships. And so we're going to talk about that. The second thing that we focus on, and that's what each of these steps represent. If we could take the kid from this position, being in front of the wall, and put them into a position where they're up on top of the wall, where they can see over it, they can see beyond it, and have a vision of where they're going, we have to help them see the necessary steps to take to get there. And that's what each of these things that Christian's kind of been taking you through, the skills of resilience that we're teaching them, are helping them see the relevance, you know, the why of school. You know, we call our program WhyTry because we're trying to help kids see why school matters, see the relevance. You know, each of these skills are represented by those metaphors, focusing on improved decision-making, tearing off your labels and focusing on their positive self-image, creating a positive self-image. Emotional regulation, you know, how to control your impulses and your defense mechanisms. We have peer influence in relationships. So climbing out of the pod is focusing on our relationships with others. Um, we have problem solving skills, the hurdle. We have hard work and determination, the importance of hard work. We have responsibilities and expectations and understanding what's expected of us and the laws and rules that we have and how they help us become stronger. We have support systems. And then if you could imagine a railing, that would kind of be that motivation formula Christian was talking about, which is really having a resilient mindset and this whole process. These are the steps that we try and help kids see, these skills that help them to get into this position where they're on top of the wall. And that's kind of our main focus. Our end goal is getting them onto this position. We call this the position of resilience. And, you know, for us, as they climb the steps of the wall, they develop the skills that help them see the relevance of school, and each step overcoming setbacks and building self-awareness, making intentional choices, equips them to handle these challenges. And reaching the top doesn't mean their struggles disappear, but it gives them a broader perspective, right? Helping them stay focused and keep moving forward despite obstacles is resilience. And it's not an achievement. It's not a goal for us. It's our focus in everything that we do is focusing on how to build and foster resilience in our students, because we can't control success all the time. You know, I always say WhyTry and the things we're teaching aren't necessarily skills of success. They're putting kids into a position where they're more likely to be successful. But it's hard when difficult things happen to us or we experience adversity to always be able to be successful. But we can respond to adversity in a way that's resilient, and that becomes our main focus, our you know, the thing that we're driving towards. Fostering strong relationships, making learning relevant, and reinforcing resilience as a lifelong skill. That's what we're doing, is kind of providing this framework to address chronic absenteeism and help students, instead of being stuck in front of this wall, to get to where they're in that big position, that big view position on top of the wall. So, you know, our goal is to try and work through this. And, you know, as we mentioned, those R's there, we refer to those as the new 3 R's of kind of emotional wellness and you know, the social, meeting the social and emotional needs of our students. That relationship component is kind of interesting. You know, we talk about that as the key to motivation, right? That's where our ability to engage our students and connect with them really comes into play. And Christian was showing you the reality ride. You know, it's interesting. We always process this with students, and we'll talk about challenges at home, at school, and with peers. And when we talk about challenges at school, we'll say, what are some of the biggest challenges you have in school? And they'll say, without fail, the number one answer is, my teachers don't like me. I hear that more than any other answer to that question. And whenever I'm training educators, I'll share that with them. I'll say, is that true? And they'll go, no, well, maybe. You know, I think we all can think of teachers that make us wonder why they're in education. But for the vast majority, I really believe most teachers do like their students. They do care. But if that's the number one thing that students say when you ask that question, that's evidence of a problem that exists. We're not effectively communicating that message. And the teachers that we recognize as exceptional, they have an ability to form that connection with their students and form a relationship where those kids aren't confused about how they feel. They know this teacher doesn't just like me, they love me. And they have this ability to inspire them and challenge them and push them because of that relationship. And so for us, we know this is hard. We have this approach to establishing relationships that we call surrendering the one-up relationship, that is all about how we, they're very specific practical interventions and things that we can do to improve our teacher-student relationship. And it's very clear, the research on positive teacher-student relationships, there's you know, it's very understandable. There are so many studies that focus on this. This was an article by Education Week just last year that was kind of talking about this specific area of what we should be focusing on. And it was showing that a review or an analysis of 46 different studies found that strong teacher-student relationships are impacting everything that we care about or measure in schools. Higher academic achievement, better attendance, improved grades, fewer disruptive behaviors and suspensions, and lower dropout rates. we know it impacts the students. We also know it impacts teachers. This study of the European Journal of Psychology of Education found a teacher's relationship with students was the best predictor of how much the teacher experienced joy versus anxiety in the class. And, when we think of our relationship with our students, that is the biggest factor of all those things that we're trying to deal with right now, this lack of connection, the disengagement of students, and the chronic absenteeism at its core is coming back to just not a strong teacher-student relationship component to what we're doing. Having one trusted adult in the student's life can make all the difference. WhyTry helps educators be that person while giving students the tools they need to succeed, not just in life, not just in school, but for life. This is one of the county offices of education in California that has been supporting WhyTry in their schools and districts. And they're talking about how in their juvenile detention and court schools, WhyTry becomes one of the few programs students actively want to attend. They connect to the lessons because it's about their choices and their futures. It's relevant to them. They're seeing it. And by the third or fourth lesson, you see a shift in students starting to show up differently, both physically and mentally. They put on the WhyTry hat because it's something special they don't want to miss. Relevance, is about how our choices today are impacting their future. And, we focus on relevance in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's just helping them see the connection to the why. We are teaching students what you need to know all the time because that's how they're measured, how they perform on a test, and how we're measured is based on our students' performance on tests. And so we often focus so much on what you need to know that we fail to help them see the why. And one of the reasons why our program is called WhyTry and our organization is called WhyTry is we're trying to help make that connection to the why. Same person here in California was saying, WhyTry does the heavy lifting. You don't need to be a superstar teacher. Just ask the right questions and let the metaphors work. For attendance, that means less structuring or less lecturing about showing up and more showing them why it matters. The reasons behind what we're trying to get them to do. Ashley Wright, this is a quote from Ashley Wright, she's an award-winning school counselor of the year in the state of Texas that's been using WhyTry for years. And she's a big WhyTry advocate. And she said, I've seen students go from constant discipline referrals to advocating for themselves just by connecting their choices to consequences through WhyTry. And so that's what's powerful is you're helping them see the why behind it. So relationships are the key to motivation. Relevance is the key to why. Those two R's help plant the seeds for the third R, resilience, our end goal. And if you want a program that is going to help build resilience, this is what our focus of everything that we do is centered around resilience. This is a superintendent. He was actually the superintendent of the year for the state of Arizona and one of the national finalists for superintendent of the year out on the Navajo reservation in a really difficult, challenging environment. They've been using WhyTry, and he said, if you want a program that works for students facing poverty, trauma, and systemic barriers, WhyTry doesn't just teach resilience, it built it into the culture of your school. And so resilience for us is, like I mentioned, it's our end goal. Have you ever wondered why I work with kids often in a high school setting, and as I get to know them and I find out, what's going on at home, what some of their challenges are, their relationships with others, I can see why they're struggling. I watch them as they shut down and they're giving up at times and they're hurting themselves and hurting those around them. It's not a mystery. It's easy to understand. But then I see another student that lives in the same neighborhood, goes to the same school. He or she might even be in the same family as the student that's shutting down, has very similar, if not the same kind of environmental experiences. But for whatever reason, that student continues to work and tries to be better each day. They find this ability to cope and even thrive in circumstances that cause another to shut down. And I always think, what is the difference? Why is it one is shutting down when the other one has this ability to cope and thrive? And I think it's clear one has resilience in moments when the other one doesn't. And we always ask, is that something you're just born with, or is it something that you can teach? And we know it's a little bit of both, right? They can teach, they will be resilient in moments because of their personality, maybe more so than somebody else in certain moments. I look at it with my own kids that way. But we also know that in 2025, we're not confused. Resilience is something that we can foster and build, and every single one of them has an amazing ability to be resilient inside of them. And so when we can't control everything that's going on around us, we're trying to build these skills of resilience in our students. That's our main focus, our main intention when we're working with them with WhyTry. And so WhyTry typically gets used in a tier 2 and tier 3 approach. But what we really recognize in elementary at a tier 1 level, we're seeing a lot of the problems that we used to be seeing in a tier 2 and a tier 3 setting across the board in a tier 1 setting now. And I think a lot of these things that we're recognizing with chronic absenteeism are indicators of that. And so one of the things that we've started doing a little bit differently is we just do workshops, not just on our toolkit WhyTry and everything that we do where we train people, but on the approach to WhyTry, which is centered around the things that we do to make things relevant for students. And most importantly, though, that key is the relationship. And we have this approach we call surrendering the one-up relationship, which came from a conversation I was having with Christian one day where I was asking him, what do you do when kids come into your office to get them to do the things that you want them to do? And he said, well, sometimes I'll let them sit in my chair. He had the big, nice leather chair that was this comfortable chair. And the kids would normally go sit in the hard plastic chair. And so he said, I call it the expert's chair. I'll let them sit in my chair. And so they'll sit in it for a few minutes and he'll say, you know, you're the expert on yourself. Nobody knows more about you. And since we're talking about you, you sit in the expert's chair. And I said, well, that's cool that you do that, you know, but why? And he goes, well, I just feel like most of these kids, they're on a losing end of every relationship they're in. You know, their teachers one up on them, their counselors one up on them, everybody else is one up on them, and they're one down. And I'm the counselor, I'm the social worker here working with them. So I'm up here, they're down here. So I want them to feel value. I want them to feel important. And so for lack of a better term, that's what we started calling this surrendering the one-up relationship. And it's something that it's kind of just blown up and expanded into so many different specific practical things that we can do. So Christian and I worked on this list of things that he would do in a one-on-one setting. And then we realized in a classroom or group setting, it's a little different dynamic. So what could we do in those settings? And we started observing some of the best teachers and educators that we know and watch how they form these amazing connections and relationships where they're communicating to their students that they like them, that they care about them. And they do it in sometimes really subtle, simple ways. So we created this whole list of practical, specific things that you can do to establish this relationship. And then we would start doing workshops on this. We would go in and train a whole school and their staff doing a fun kind of a 2-hour workshop where we're talking about this concept of surrendering the one-up relationship and how we can help them see their students a little bit differently. And one of the things I love with this workshop that we would do is we create insight in staff without making them feel guilty for not doing this better. You know, we recognize that there's things that we each do on a daily basis that are important to our work each day. And in those moments, we're focusing on ourselves. And so we use a metaphor of a selfie. You know, when you take your phone and you take a picture as a selfie, you are the subject. You are, the camera's pointing at you and the environment that you're in. And so we talk about this kind of related to some of the things that we do when we're in selfie mode. It's when we're focusing on ourselves, our own needs, our feelings, our goals. Sometimes it's prep work or things that we're needing for maybe even our own self-care that are important parts of what we do every day. But when we're in that mode, it's impacting our ability to really form those important key relationships with our students. So we have this other mode called portrait mode, which is where we turn the camera around and we have it point towards our students. And we're really focusing on them. And it's in moments when we're in portrait mode is our focus is on our students and we're helping our students feel valued. We're building trust with students and we're helping students feel accepted. And all of these things that we're doing in this workshop are really fun. It's an easy workshop to deliver. It helps change the perception and equips them with very specific practical things that they can do. You know, one of the things that we often hear about is the importance of relationships, but you know why they're important, but we rarely have anybody talking about how to do it. And that's what this workshop provides, is this resource on how to do this relationship. So we would do this, come in, train a whole staff on this, give them these tools and equip them, and they'd be motivated. And then the frustration would set in after a couple months, where the busyness of school, and because we were outsiders coming in to train them on this, it has an impact for a little while, but not a lasting impact that truly makes change. And so we thought, okay, this needs to be different. How can we make this be something that continues to be focused on in the school and is supported, and it doesn't get forgotten, and that there's more resources and support around this? And so we built this whole toolkit. So WhyTry has a toolkit where we deliver all these resources for teachers and counselors and educators to work with students. We created a resource, we call it the Transformational Leader Toolkit, for school leadership teams and administrators to provide resources for their staff in teaching these or doing these pre-built staff development workshops. And so we have all these different workshops, as well as that initial first workshop. So we don't even go in anymore and do that to the staff. We actually just train the leadership team and let them deliver that first workshop. And then we have a series of other workshops that are follow-ups to that, so that we can keep the conversation going. It doesn't just be a one-time thing that is great, but then kind of wears off over time. It's not just a one and done professional development that we see all the time. And so the follow-up workshops that we have include multiple workshops on surrendering the one-up, training follow-up and digging deeper and more strategies for surrendering the one-up relationship, this approach. There are very specific practical things that we can do. We have workshops on a trauma-informed approach, on improving relationships through self-awareness, celebrating success, and resilient listening. And what I love, this kind of becomes our tier one approach on how we're working with all students. And it's nice in that it's not something that we're going in and staff have to learn this whole new thing. It's not adding to their plate of responsibilities and things that are always a growing list. And everybody in education right now feels overwhelmed. And we're dealing with behavioral problems. We're dealing with chronic absenteeism. We're dealing with the disconnectedness and a lot of challenges that sometimes are outside what we really got into education to do in the first place. And so this just becomes something that you can add to your daily routine. It's not like a whole resource that has to be learned or a new curriculum that you have to figure out how to deliver. And so when we focus on positive teacher-student relationships, it becomes a long-term approach to changing school culture. And it has the potential to reduce staff turnover and improve job satisfaction. That is a huge problem right now. Everywhere in the country, states are dealing with shortage of teachers and people leaving education, and they're lowering the requirements to become a teacher just to try and entice people to want to come and join us. Classroom sizes are getting bigger, not smaller, because of a shortage of staff. And so if we can help improve our relationships with our students and make that a key focus, it's going to impact not just the students and their attendance, but it's going to impact our staff, the way we feel about our jobs, and the connectedness we have to each other. And we believe it's the most effective way to improve attendance, student engagement, and reduce chronic absenteeism. And so our goal, again, is to try and get those kids, thinking of this metaphor of the wall, where they're not standing in front of that wall with that limited view, to get them on top of the wall. And we have to have those strong relationships. We have to help them see the relevance and make resilience our focus. I don't know if there's ever been a time in our history where our students have needed more focus on resilience, where we as educators need more focus on resilience. And so one of the things we're so grateful you guys tuned in today. And this was the lunch webinar. We wanted to make it an hour. We're a little over. We apologize. But we want you to take away something from this today. We have a free lesson plan in WhyTry to share with you on the Reality Ride, which is our number one most commonly used resource that can be used to deliver either one-on-one or with a student or a group of kids. We've got the whole lesson plan resource for you there, so you can see how to take that and try it out. We have a resource that we'll share that's a summary of the information that we've shared today. We have a couple other free resources that are really great. We have a Resilient Educator webinar series. If any of you have tuned into some of our webinars, we actually have one on Thursday on this same topic. It's going to be a kind of a continuation of this topic. And so we'll send you a little link to that, a resource where you can go to go access that one if you'd like to. It's going to be a little bit later than this one in the day. It'll be 3 o'clock Eastern time for most of you. We also have a podcast that focuses on what we cover in our webinar series. So if you want to listen to these after the fact in your car, just driving, you can listen to the conversations that we have with these education experts from all over the country sharing their insights. And these are usually topical discussions. They're not focusing just on what we do as an organization. They're talking about the issues that we're seeing and sharing insights and strategies and very practical resources and ideas. And then we have a free parent guide to resilience that we want to share with you as well. So if you follow that QR code right there, in fact, I can probably send a link here. Let me jump over to my browser for 1 second here. Christian, you want to add anything?
Yeah, if you guys put a team together, I've enjoyed this workshop, and you guys are many are from places in the U.S. I've spent a lot of time in just looking at where you guys are from, and what I'd like to do is just offer you guys a resilience workshop. I'll do a free resilience workshop. I'm usually paid to do that, and I don't do this very often. Hopefully Hans doesn't kill me, but yeah, if you can get a team together, some key decision makers, a team together, I'll do a 1 hour workshop on my book, The Resilience Breakthrough. And don't advertise that to too many people, but yeah, that's a good deal, you guys. I promise you, that's a
If you'd be interested, you can type in the chat window and we'll follow up with you. Yeah, sorry, I'm going back to the QR code. I'm pasting it here. Here's a link to the same thing in the QR code. If you want to go there, you
if
can
you
do
email
that.
Hans if you email Hans to it, Hans at whytry.org, he can coordinate me speaking to some of your team there at your district. So if you're interested in doing that, I would take advantage of that. Okay, there's a few people wanting to do that. All right, we'll make sure that happens. So those are saying you really want to get that, then just email Hans or go to that QR code or go to that that link Hans just put up. They can get a hold of that link. Hans would take them to you on that. Yep, if you're interested in the resilience workshop, just email Hans, Hans at whytry.org. It's interesting, a little side note. My name's Christian, of course. That's Hans Christian, and the co-author on the book The Resilience Breakthrough's last name is Anderson. And so you can't make that up. So it's kind of a funny thing. But if you're interested in that workshop, hey, thank you, One Heart from. But if you're interested in that workshop, yeah, just email Hans and we'll make that happen. Thank you for the hearts, man. You guys are awesome. I just want to thank you guys for what you're doing right now to help so many students. There's no more important time than education. The one thing no one can take from you is your education. It's the most powerful thing. I get the opportunity. I've gone 7 million miles speaking across this country. No one can take my education on what I learned speaking, 7 million miles across this country. It's one of the most powerful things. And I don't know any more important work than education. Education is the way out of poverty, got me out of poverty. It transformed my life. And yeah, feel free to put in the comments what you liked, what you didn't like, how we can help you, how we can improve this. Me and Hans are totally open to feedback. And yeah, please get me there. Please invite me. I can show up in person, but if you want to do a free workshop, please just get a hold of us and I'll do a free workshop on resilience to your staff.
I just pasted a link there. I'll paste it one more time in here because it got dropped down from you guys saying things. If you fill this out, this is a quick form. If you're interested in having us having Christian do a presentation or workshop on resilience for your staff, just a free 1 hour presentation, he'll do that virtually until he is booked up and he doesn't have any more spaces left. So if any of you are interested in that,
do it quick. You gotta do it quick.
Fill that out. If you have any other questions or things, you can fill out that form, and we'll get back with you. And like Christian said, if you are interested in learning more about our Transformational Leader Toolkit or the WhyTry program and how it can be used, we can schedule a demo with you with our program director. His name is Mike, and he's awesome. He's a social worker by background as well, and a former administrator. But Mike and or myself will take you through a live demo and show you how the Transformational Leader Toolkit works, and be able to answer any questions related to that. And then if you do that, we'll send you a free copy of the book. So,
Yep. If you set up a demo for me to come speak, I'll send you a signed copy of the book, The Resilience Breakthrough. So if you're the one setting that up, I'll send you a hardbound signed copy of the book. There you go. I have nothing else to give, man. I'm trying to give y'all everything I have. But you guys are my heroes, man. That's why I love to give to you guys. You guys are doing the most important work. Thank you for what you do for so many students like myself. Thank you. Thank you.
Andrea, yes, your question, you work with adults, especially when it comes to, we do workshops on the resilience breakthrough with adults. So we have that's more centered around the content of the book and the model of resilience that's in our book. And we do workshops on that with adults. We've done it with first responders in different industries where we'll
Business leaders.
teach our skills of resilience for nurses and people that work in healthcare, or any industry where people are experiencing high stress, and everybody can relate to resilience. A sales team, frontline workers, everybody can. And so we often do workshops on any of those areas focusing on resilience.